Welcome to the Leap to Launch. Here we uncover the unvarnished truth of starting out. We delve into the real stories of business and creation, hear from those who have soared, stumbled, and are still climbing, sharing the raw, unfiltered truths of their entrepreneurial journeys. It's a deep dive into the triumphs, trials, and the relentless hustle behind the scenes. For dreamers and doers and anyone in between, this is where ambitions come to life and reality meets the dream. I'm Sagarika Babu.
I'm Siddharth Kumar. This episode's guest is Renuka Reddy, aka Renu. Renuka Reddy, founder of Retreat Textile Studio in Bangalore, is a modern artist who revitalizes the 18th century Indian Chintz techniques. She experiments with traditional materials like buffalo milk, sheep dung, moderns, dyes, and resins, striving to recreate the perfection that made Chintz a pivotal art form in India. Renu's journey is incredible. Her leap into the lost world of Chintz has led her from making automotive fabrics to being a featured artist at the Victoria and Albert Museum in the UK. Welcome to the Leap to Launch, Renu.
Thanks, Siddharth.
So you were a NIFT product, right?
Yes, way back when there was only one NIFT. So that will tell you how long ago that was.
So this was what, one of the first batches?
I believe it was the fourth. So this was 94 to 96 in Delhi.
This is when all Ritu Beri was studying and all these famous designers started coming out of NIFT.
That's right.
Right. And then what happened after NIFT?
I actually became an entrepreneur right off of college.
Really?
I partnered with a classmate, and it's a really funny story because having had done internships, and I was studying leather at that time. Having worked in these companies for a while, I had absolutely made up my mind that I did not want to work in any of these places. And my friend, who was my classmate, she was appearing for the placement interviews, and she went for one, and I was standing outside and telling her, "Don't do it. Let's start something on our own." So we did eventually. We started a design consultancy, basically working with the government of India and private entities.
Nice. And how long did that?
So we did that from 96 to 2001.
Oh, okay. So you were there for 5 years. Oh, wow. Yeah. And what made you decide to move on from that?
I think it was maybe a case of burnout, or interestingly, we realized the mistakes we had made. One of the big ones was that we didn't take enough risk. Surprisingly, even though we were so young and fearless, but we didn't take enough risk business-wise. We didn't grow as much as we should have, and we did have enough ambition, and that wasn't being met with the entity we had formed. So it was time to move on. And different opportunities presented, and it was.
And after that, you moved to the US.
Correct.
And you became an automotive fabric engineer.
Well, not exactly a fabric engineer. My basic job, or rather primary responsibility, was to evaluate automotive textiles in terms of properties.
Oh, nice. So you were proper hardcore application, technical,
Yes, absolutely.
corporate job.
Yes.
Oh, wow. How was that? That must have been scary.
I loved it.
You loved the corporate world?
I absolutely loved it. I went from, being my own boss, working anywhere I wanted, choosing choosing the work that I want to do, to a corporate world where I used to work for this French company, which had presence in the US at that time. And I had 5 different bosses across the globe.
And did you have a good boss? Did that help?
I had great bosses, but all the bosses did not get along with each other. So that was challenging, but I loved it. I loved that, so many people were doing a little part of it, and everything was coming together and making sense.
Did the structure help?
I think it did. For me, it was the first time I had a corporate job. So that in itself was, I basically went in with a lot of open mind. I welcomed the experience. I didn't say, I don't want to be told what to do. I will only do what I signed up for. It was just one big, almost like a game or an experience. And I loved managing these expectations from 5 different bosses. I loved managing my clients' expectations. I loved it, to be honest. I also got to travel the world because I was part of an R&D team which was placed in different places, continents, and I love the collaboration. And
I find it very interesting because a lot of people who become entrepreneurs say that one of their primary motivations to become an entrepreneur is that they don't want to work for someone else. The corporate life didn't work for them. And then here I'm hearing you say, as an entrepreneur who moved into the corporate world, that you love the structure. Now, anybody else hearing the fact that they had 5 bosses will say, look, I'm going to resign right now. I can't deal with one boss, but here I have to deal with 5 bosses, and all 5 bosses don't get along with each other. But you were able to navigate that, and it didn't cause you stress?
No, I think, knowing myself, I'm very curious about people in general. I'm curious about not just them, their designation. I'm curious about them as a person. So I had French bosses and American bosses. And it was very interesting for me to see how they behave in certain circumstances, or what is it of themselves that they bring to a situation, or to me, for example. I was very fascinated with the cultural play, with the people who they are, with their gender, a man being different or a woman being. I had both genders as bosses. So I think I was also in a place, having moved from India to the US, having gone back to school to study technical textiles. And this was also like another university for me. I was learning about how it all works in the corporate world. I wasn't coming from a place of judgment. I was a sponge. I was just, soaking in everything. So that helped.
How long did you do this?
I think about 5 years.
Oh, wow. So a good corporate stint.
Yes.
So you learn everything of what it takes to work in a corporate environment. Yeah. And then what happened after that? You decided to move on?
I decided to come back to India.
Right. And what, you wanted to move back to India to do automotive fabrics, or you just want to come back and explore?
It was more like I wanted to be back with family.
Right.
I have a close-knit family, and I just, actually, the thought of, it might sound a little silly, but I realized that I did come back to India every year.
Right.
So I saw my mother once. So if she lived for another 25 years, I would see her 25 times.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's deep.
Yeah. But so that kind of was a strong motivation for me to be able to come back. Of course, I see her every day now. I'm not sure that's a polar opposite, but big drive for me to come back to India was family. And it's not that I'm going to have to change or give up textiles, which is my field.
Right.
There's so much happening in India, and it was a good time for me to move.
Fantastic. So how did you start going about exploring what to do after you leaving the US?
Honestly, I had no idea what I was going to do when I decided to come back to India. One of the things I did was to start collecting textile books, which were not so accessible in India. And I'm talking about 2009. I knew I wanted to go back and work in textiles. And because I had worked in India for about 6 years, I kind of knew where I wanted to go. I certainly did not want to join, say, an export house. That was, from the get-go, is not something I wanted to do. Even though I have, worked in a corporate setting with automotive textiles, churning out, I guess, cars, and I could have moved to an export house, but that's not something I wanted to do anymore. There weren't many opportunities with technical textiles, which I really love, in India, and of course, I knew I wanted to come back to Bangalore. Main reason for me coming back to India was my family. So, and this is where they're based. And I love Bangalore. Who doesn't love Bangalore's weather, right?
Absolutely. Well,
not recently.
weather,
It's still better than.
It's the right time to talk about Bangalore weather. But you did mention about the pre-Amazon, pre-Kindle part, when you started collecting the textile books and everything. Where were you actually collecting these from? Like, do you have like a source? Were you going to like a bookstore, like textile bookstore? I don't know.
Well, in the US, Amazon did have quite a big collection of textile, but there were also, secondhand bookstores online in the US at that time. So, for example, I got this 1970s publication, which is no longer published, and I got it for an absolute steal because the library decided it didn't want it. I mean, I couldn't even get my hands on it today if I wanted.
Really?
Yeah.
Not even online? Or even a PDF copy?
Maybe at a huge price.
Oh, wow. Cool. And so you did read a lot.
I did. I visited museums. I was lucky that I had a downtime in the US where between working for the automotive sector and deciding to come back to India, I had about a year to decide what I wanted to do. So I explored. I did all kinds of, I worked I was an agent for a brief time for a company which sells essential oils in India, and I was trying to do marketing for them.
Oh, wow.
From in the US. I wasn't tied down to textiles, but I loved the idea of just getting a result, whatever it meant to do. So, but I realized very soon that marketing was not for me. Absolutely. And so I really started focusing on textiles because that is really my first love. So yes, I read a lot. I looked at what kind of textiles I wanted to go to because India has such a wide variety of techniques and designs and regions which specialized in certain textiles. I did designs. I just kept feeding my creative juices at that time in the downtime to see what I wanted to do, what really sparked. Having had worked with textiles, handloom textiles in India, again, I had a background. I knew what to expect. I was quite sure that the field hadn't changed all so much from the time that I had been gone for about 9 years. So one of the books that I complete coincidentally had purchased was this book called Chintz, Indian Textiles for the West, written by Rosemary Krill, who is the senior curator at the Victoria Albert Museum and published by V&A as well. So that was one of the books I had completely coincidentally, not knowing anything about it, picked up. I was living in Houston at the time, and I still recall the day I received it, and I took off the packaging, and I still really remember the very visceral reaction I had to it. It just pulled me in. Just the cover, I'm not even talking about the inside. And of course, I flipped through it many, many, many times. And
were the angels singing in the background?
Oh, totally. Absolutely. Like, oh my God. I mean, I have seen a lot of textiles in my experience in all the years that I've spent. But this was something I had not felt before.
Clearly this was a pivotal moment in your life.
Yes.
Just this book.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And was it that you were waiting for this pivotal moment, or it just happened?
It happened.
How did it feel? Incredible, huh?
I mean, it's like, this thing like you got to do it. You just have to do something about this. I don't know what. I did not know then what yet, but I just knew I had to do something about this. I had to know more about this textile. Where did it come from? I mean, which is kind of, again, a bit silly because I am from the textile background. My education is in textiles, but somehow I had not been exposed that much to Chintz.
So for our listeners, just so that some of whom may not know what Chintz is. So what is Chintz?
Well, we know in India as kalamkari.
Okay.
Chintz is a word that was given by the British when kalamkari was exported to England. And it basically comes from the word, a North Indian, and I don't want to say Hindi because I'm not sure, is the word chint, which means spotted or dyed cloth. So it pluralized from chint to chintz.
Right.
And then it stuck.
But the British chintz fabric is more towards floral patterns. Because traditionally kalamkaris had a lot of religious myths, religious historical figures, and a lot more. The traditional kalamkari work
Yes.
which is which is very intricate work.
Yes.
A lot of mythology in it. But whereas I think the British took the intrication of that work and converted it into something that they like, which is probably floral patterns.
Yes, I would say in the broad sense, yes. The thing about Chintz was that the technique was always the same, but it was hugely exported to all over the world. It was exported from India. And I'm talking about the 17th and 18th, 19th centuries. It went to England. It went to Netherlands. It went to, of course, Persia. It went to France. So everywhere that it went, Indonesia, of course, a huge market. The beauty of it is that it was customized to the local taste, even back then. So a lot of the florals that you see in the Western chintz is designs that the West brought in to be made because they knew their market, that florals would do well for them.
Right.
But what's so beautiful about that, one of the things that I love about the history of chintz is that it was such a proof of conversation between cultures, because the English brought in these florals, which are completely, strange flora for the Indian craftsmen who did not, maybe we knew what rose was. I don't know if rose existed back then, but say a tulip is not something that we would have known at that time.
Yeah, for him, he might be as good as drawing an alien.
Yeah. And so the beauty of it is, they brought in drawings, but the Indian craftsman at that time interpreted it in his own way. So the result was exotic to both sides. And that's something that still holds people because it looks so exotic. The florals, the details, that's what's beautiful about it.
So the stereotypical knowledge of chintz, of the layman knowledge of chintz, is floral patterns using kalamkari techniques. Is that true? Am I missing something? Is there something much more in chintz?
Chintz is just a terminology that went to the West.
Kalamkari.
For kalamkari, yes. For example, the Portuguese called it pintados, which means painted cloths.
I love the name.
Pintado. Well, Japanese called it sarasa.
Oh, wow. What is it? Any meaning?
There is a meaning which I cannot recall right now.
But it's lovely.
Yeah, sarasa is beautiful, isn't it?
It is.
The Indonesian had probably had their own name. And kalamkari is actually a Persian word. It's not from India. It's like kalam is a pen, kari is work. So kalamkari. It's a same technique, but different names from different regions. And exactly because it's different regions, each region had their own kind of aesthetic. So while it was florals to the West predominantly, the Indonesian chintz was very different from the West. They had more repetition. And of course, they did have religious. There was some fantastic paintings, historic textiles which have the Ramayana. So it's that I think what I want to emphasize is that it was the technique. It was the same technique that went into all different parts of the world, but they looked completely different.
So outside India, what were they primarily using chintz for?
Well, actually, in India at that time, I don't have a lot of, information on what they were used for. I don't think they were certainly used for locals. They were probably, the local kings would have, commissioned the pieces. I mean, we have some beautiful old tents, maybe some clothing, religious hangings in temples for the local market. Well, for the West, it was... It started off as, bed hangings. They basically covered the entire walls with it. And at some point, they were wearing it as well. It was everywhere.
So it was used as wallpaper?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
But in the East, in Indonesia, it was predominantly rituals, a religious ceremony. That was what was primarily used for.
Fantastic. Did anybody use chintz to tell a story?
I don't believe there's a story that was used, but there was certainly especially commission paintings or textiles that had, say, like a coat of arms of certain family.
Right.
So it was definitely like belonged to that family. They were making a statement with it.
So you read this life-changing book by Rosemary Krill. Then what's the first thing that you did after that?
So I said, okay, this is what I want to do. I don't know what, I don't know how, I don't know when, but this is something that I want to do. And I had been a designer in my past life, work experience in India. So my immediate idea was to basically take these designs and then go to a craftsmen, artisans who are practicing some of this art form, and to basically get textiles made was my idea.
Wow, from scratch.
Well, I didn't know what was being made at this time currently in terms of technique. I just knew there are kalamkari artisans still very much, and luckily being from Andhra Pradesh, and I know the language Telugu and I speak it as my mother tongue, and that this art form is also existing in like Kalahasti is a major center for
So
for
it's
hand painted
Srikalahasti and
textiles.
Machilipatnam are the main centers?
Yes.
Right. So how did it feel going to the home of Kalamkari, the home of Chintz, seeing the techniques? How did that happen? How did that feel?
It was the first time I was going to these places. So yeah, it is really something to go and see it in real, to see what was being practiced, to be able to talk to people about, hey, I thought this, what is happening, or to have an exchange with an artisan is incredibly enriching in all sorts of ways. But what I also found, and of course I had to do these many different soirees because I mean, immediately after a few of these visits, I could see that what I wanted to make, which is what the images from the book and what was being made, are not the same.
Were you crushed?
I was. Absolutely. I was like, okay, now what? Why? Why is it not the same? So
You just didn't resonate with the pieces that were coming out?
yeah, I didn't. No, I didn't have the same reaction to them that I had from the images in the book. Absolutely not.
They just felt fake?
Not fake. Absolutely not fake. Just different.
Yeah.
They didn't look the same.
Wow. Wow.
And so the question was why? And it took me some time to figure out why. Why didn't they look the same? They are called the same. They are the same centers. What's changed?
So what was your first hypothesis as to why it wasn't the same?
Well, for one, I knew that it's not the same materials.
Okay.
So, for example, the historic pieces were made with natural dyes. And it took me some time to realize that on the ground today, natural dyes are predominantly replaced with chemical dyes.
Absolutely.
And that was, without doing any much of research, I could see that there was a difference in the product, in the outcome.
Right.
And the answers didn't come to me immediately. Why were they different? I just knew they were different. It took some time, maybe 6 months to a year, to read and to understand and to dissect and to see what the comparative steps were historically and currently, what were the different. I just knew that it had to be the technique for one thing, because it wasn't the motives, right? I could see a flower, and I could see a flower that was inspired by the historic pieces done today, but it looked different. And I have some fantastic visual comparisons of the same motif done today and done in the 18th century. It was the technique that is not the same. And I think the day it hit me, and it hit me very hard, was that if I love historic chintz the way it looks, it is because of how it is made. And so if I want to recreate that, it has to be done the way it was made 200 years ago. There are no, I mean, it's so inextricably tied. The way it looks is tied to how it's made. It's not like I can make a table in the 18th century and I can make a table now, but they might end up looking the same, but not with this.
Were angels singing in the background when this realization hit?
It was like an aha moment. Okay, I have some kind of direction now to take as, where do I go from here?
Right. And where did you go from there?
Well, initially I started reading a lot, researching, and I was lucky in that there were some historic accounts written in the 18th century by travelers. There's a French Jesuit priest, a military officer who passed through India, who cataloged everything about this process in very detail. And we are lucky that survived, and it's published now and translated, and so I can read it and others can read it. So that was pretty much my basis.
But it was incomplete.
I wouldn't say incomplete. I mean, it's like reading a technical manual and not knowing whether it's true or not. I don't know. I don't have the background to discern if it's true or not yet. Okay, so this guy said, step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. I don't know if it makes sense unless I realized I have to do it. Unless somebody does it.
So you actually became an artisan yourself?
Well, not right away, because whatever I learned, different materials, or, okay, step 1, maybe we should try this. This is not done now, but let's try it now, And I would send the materials and, I would work with local craftsmen. But the progress was really slow, or there was no progress at all. Understandably, because, the people I was working with were running production centers. They were not studios sitting to figure out what this crazy woman wants to do. And so understandably, the progress was not happening. And that's when I realized that, okay, if I really want to do this, then I just have to do it myself.
Is that when you set up Red Tree Textile Studio?
Yes.
So Red Tree was set up to be your lab for recreating kalamkari.
Correct.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Why the name Red Tree?
Red is a really important color. It is also the color of a natural dye called shea or shiver, which is actually not even used anymore. Nobody knows how to use it anymore. And red being such a important color in Chintz, as well as red is my last name is Reddy. So I used to be called Red in college. It resonated with me.
Fantastic. One thing that resonates throughout this entire conversation, that the one common theme that I'm unpacking, is that there was a lot of research, and there was a lot of how did you go about this research? Because you mentioned that you read a lot through text, but I'm guessing something like kalamkari, there's a lot of oral tradition, which is passed down from one generation to another amongst the artisans. Mm-hmm. So did you end up becoming an oral historian yourself?
Unfortunately, these techniques that I'm talking about haven't been practiced maybe 70 to 80 years.
All right.
So some of them have not been passed down, unfortunately, and that's why they're lost.
So the oral tradition was completely lost?
For some techniques, yes.
Oh, wow.
So, for example, the wax resist. I mean, the quality of resist in the 18th century was so fine that what even a pen could draw. Can you imagine that? Handling hot wax, but drawing a finer line than you can with a pen, and to not having that technique at all today.
Oh, wow.
So there's certainly, there's been over time that it has been lost. Some of the traditions, yes, absolutely. The ones that are still practiced today, there is an oral tradition of how it's passed down. Certainly I don't believe any lab books that exist, it's certainly passed through oral tradition. But there were things that I had to go back to the historic texts to find out how to do it.
So let's say that you had to figure out, and I'm guessing these were many, many projects, because you had to figure out the resist, you had to figure out the dyes, the mordants. So it was not just one project, you had to figure out, God only knows, maybe 100 different components, and each were separate research project in itself,
That's a great observation. Absolutely, yes.
right?
Each one of them was a different challenge altogether.
Right. Now, and I'm guessing some were obviously easier because better documented. Some were terrible, like the wax resist. How did you go about approaching something where your baseline was completely not there?
One of the things that I did was travel extensively. I traveled to many of the museums in Europe which had great collections of chintz. I mean, through all this, I hadn't seen a real chintz. I think in the first 1 or 2 years, I hadn't seen a real chintz at all. I was still looking at books. And at a point where I realized, okay, now I have to get out of the comfort of my home and,
So you fell in love with images of chintz.
Yes.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So how did it feel when you saw chintz for the first time?
Oh my God. And that's a great story because one of the first museums that I went to is the Fries Museum in Netherlands. And I had, I started writing to all these museums, to the curators, and I had an appointment with the curator at the Fries Museum. And I went there that day, the day and time that we had figured out works for us. And it turned out that day was actually a holiday in Netherlands. But the curator, Renuka, she made herself available. And what is even more amazing when I look back today is, most of the museums have their collections in a storehouse, which is where the ambient temperature is controlled for obvious reasons. At that time, Fries was in an older building, and the entire storage was right behind them. So it was like just walk 2 steps and you had the entire storage. So the day that I visited Fries Museum, there was nobody else in the office. There was just a curator. There was me and there was my partner. And she said, "Oh, you want to study chintz? Okay." And she just opened up these cupboards and there were hundreds of chintz textiles, beautiful skirts and hangings just there for me to touch. And I'm just to illustrate what an amazing instance that was, is if today you want to see textiles at V&A, you have to choose at the most 4 to 5 textiles and say you want to see this, and only those are made available to you.
Oh, wow.
And if you want to see the Rijksmuseum, I think maybe they've opened, but they have been closed for years for renovation. So imagine me surrounded by hundreds of chintz textiles that most people can only dream of.
You were a kid in a candy shop?
Absolutely. And the funny thing was, a few years later, Fries Museum moved to a swanky new building and a swanky new storage house. So yeah, today if I went back to Fries Museum, I'll probably only see 2-3 textiles. So it was just very fortuitous that just that day it worked out that way. And what that, in terms of research, what that meant was, I probably came away that day with like some 2,000 pictures.
Wow.
Pictures that I can look at later on. And I don't think I did much thinking that day. It was just like, click, click, click. And one of the first things that I still remember is when you look at chintz textiles, say a hanging, and there were huge hangings. I'm talking about like 4 meters by 4 meters. They were big because they covered big rooms in these palaces and whatnot. They look heavy. Visually, when you look at it, they look really heavy, like the heavy textiles that covered locally made English textiles. But when I still remember when I first touched a chintz, it is so thin. It looks heavy, but when you touched it, it was amazingly light fabric. So that's something, again, I really took away. And of course, that was a whole research question. Why did it have to be thin? And yeah, I actually even wrote an essay on it. So yeah, but to your point, Siddharth, what you said was absolutely true. Every part of making chintz is a separate challenge, a separate study. I mean, someone can do a PhD in every one of these and still not cover everything, because this textile has evolved for over 2,000 years. It has been fine-tuned by artisans based on their surroundings, based on the challenges that they had at the time, and it has evolved for such a long time and there's so many mysteries about it.
With the amount of work that you've done, you should be Dr. Renu Reddy. Possibly. Maybe 7 PhDs worth?
I don't know.
Honestly, it sounds like a Lara Croft Tomb Raider kind of scenario without all of the action and everything, because it's so
Yeah,
much
all the
research.
skimpy clothes.
Yeah, that too.
And the long braid.
That too. But this is so interesting. I would really like to know from, like, if you can just run me through some of the techniques that are that goes into making a pure chintz fabric from scratch, from the start to the end. I would really like to know the techniques that are involved in it.
Boy, that's a tall order. So I will start with just dispelling a myth that is associated because of the definition of these textiles. Usually these textiles are called painted textiles. Now, when you hear painted textile, it just sounds like, you take a cloth and you just take a natural dye and you paint with it. It is very far from that. What these are actually are the hand-painted, hand-drawn, resist dyed textiles. And that is entirely a different meaning from just hand-painted textile. So to run you really quickly with through the process, it starts first with preparing cotton for the next step, which is basically say I'm starting with drawing the outlines. You would know that if I took a watery paint and I put it on cloth, it's going to spread. So what do I have to do first to make the cloth give that property that I can actually paint on it? And what is buffalo milk and a fruit nut called myrobalan is basically applied onto the cloth. What the buffalo milk does is the fat in it renders it to a quality where you can actually draw with watery substance on it without spreading. And the myrobalan is, again, preparing for the next step, which is drawing black outlines. So again, the chemistry in it is that myrobalan has tannin and your black is, the source is iron. So these two combine to make an insoluble black color. And interesting tidbit about that is that this is the formula for writing ink in Europe for centuries. In fact, until the 19th century.
Oh, wow.
I'm talking about writing books. This is the medium for writing. So that is the first step that you prepare. Then the next step is you draw the outlines, whether it's with black, which is iron mordant, or you paint, or you draw, if you want red outlines, you paint with alum, which is actually colorless. And again, the ingenuity of the historic craftsman is that how do you draw with something that is colorless, right? So what they did was they tinted it with sapan wood, which gives it just a slightly pinkish color, which actually does not contribute to the dye, but you know where you're drawing. And then the whole textile is dyed in, and I'll just say madder, because I mean, there are different kinds of madder, which basically what it does is gives red to the alum and also deepens the black color. And I mean, for our audience who does not know what madder is, it's just a source of red color. You can't see me, but I'm putting it in quotes.
Like the Portuguese Madeira.
Yes. So once you dye the cloth in madder and you've gotten the colors you want, but what happens is the background also picks on this reddish pink, but you want a white background. And so you bleach the cloth with sheep dung and sunlight. And what that means is you soak the cloth in dung overnight and then you expose it to sunlight and you do this maybe about 10 days, depending on what weather it is, until you get a white background and all the other areas that you want colored are in the colors that you have planned.
Fantastic.
That is only the first step. Sorry.
So this is the blueprint phase.
Yes. Yeah, it's actually, you're right. Every step is the same, and there are several steps of this. The only thing that is different is the indigo, which is, again, it just blows my mind even thinking about it. So indigo was not painted Maybe in some cases it was painted, and academically there's a huge debate whether indigo was painted or not in India historically. It's a fascinating debate. But either way, so the way indigo was applied onto the cloth is all the areas that you did not want blue were covered with wax.
Hence the wax resist.
Correct. And then the whole cloth was dipped into these vats, indigo vats, which had a very small opening. But they came out in such a way that there were almost no cracks or very fine cracks. And then you would dissolve, you would boil it to remove the wax. So even if you had like 4 leaves or 4 blue areas in a huge piece, they still dyed the whole cloth.
Wow. So for argument's sake, now the first process is done to add, say, one particular color and one particular dimension to the fabric. And then you do it multiple times until you add multiple dimensions. And then finally you do this crazy process for indigo, which is the wax resist. Am I right?
To some extent, I just want to clarify over there that actually colors are not layered.
Oh, it isn't?
It isn't. So it's actually, you do the outlines and then you do the blues. And then is another absolute magical step where you get many colors from one dye bath.
Oh.
Which is not what we generally do when we are, say, printing. You print each color at a time. But this is different. So what you do...
In a bath, it's multiple colors?
Yes.
Single bath?
Single bath.
Wow, that's magic.
That is absolutely magic and one of my favorite steps. And the reason that happens is because you paint with... And this is why I want to remind that you don't paint with a dye. You actually paint the moderns.
Right.
So again, for people, your audience who do not know what moderns are, because madder, for example, does not have a natural affinity to bond with cotton, we use metallic salts called moderns, which basically form a bond with cotton as well as bond with madder. So they are the in-between molecules that are holding these two together.
So for each color, you will have a mordant.
Correct.
And mordants are basically Fevicol.
Yeah, in a way, yes.
In a way, to ensure that color
yes.
falls along that exact same pattern.
Yes.
And they used to do these patterns as thin as a hairline?
In some places, yes.
Wow. So that means the mordant was was applied that thin, and all of this is the same color. All the colors are in the same vat.
Yes.
And it comes out with such fine, intricate patterns.
Yes. And so when I say different colors, they figured out that I can use a really concentrated, say, alum to get a bright red. I can also use a very weak alum concentration to get a pink. But I can also combine iron with my alum to get purple, to get burgundy, to get maroon. So the color is actually coming from madder alone. It's all this combination of moderns that gives you, this wide variety of colors. And you have to see it to really believe it, that all these colors, and it's a slow process, the dyeing. It's about a 2-hour process where you increase the temperature very slowly. And then you start seeing colors emerge. You literally like coaxing the color out of it. It's a beautiful step.
I can imagine. How long does it take to make something? Say, 5 colors?
You mean to paint or to dye?
From idea to, hey, this fabric looks nice.
So the two different things. If you want to experiment, oh boy, it could take many, many, many weeks. Because if you're experimenting.
Okay.
So the difference is, say for example, you're dyeing a cloth. You're a textile guy as well. You're dyeing a cloth, you dye it, you take it out, you dry it, and that's a color, right? Yes, no, and then you move on to the next step. In this case, my final result is not out there until I paint, I dye, I bleach for 10 days.
Wow.
And then I have a result to analyze and say, okay, this worked, this not. So the experimental phase is really, really long compared to, say, dyeing cloth, which natural dyes. It's a painting and the bleaching that makes it very complicated.
Oh, wow. and let's say that you're not experimenting, you have an idea, you know what you want. It's what, 2 weeks, 3 weeks to make something.
Yeah,
Wow, it's a lot of time, huh?
it does. I mean, whenever I'm asked for, lead time to do a painting, my answer is, even if you want me to make a 6 inch by 6 inch, it will still take me 3 months
Oh wow,
if I don't want to, use any shortcuts.
oh wow. So did it make you appreciate the time taken to make a beautiful piece of art? Did it make you appreciate the slowness of it? The like as you're waiting 10 days for an output, does it make you appreciate how difficult it is? Does it make you value your artwork a lot more?
Honestly, it's incredibly frustrating. I just hated the fact that I have to wait, to come up with the next experiment or to get direction on what to do next. Um, Frustrating, but also always an underlying appreciation of how someone else figured it out at a time, where there was just the tools were so basic. We didn't have pH meters or electricity or.
Right. And so you started making chintz pieces yourselves as an artist?
I started, as Agrika said, the techniques. I really first just started working with the challenges. I identified challenges very early on, and said that, okay, if I can't figure out solutions for this, then I'm not going to work on chintz. That's a decision I made very early on. So, for example, the wax resist. Now, I told you about wax resist only for large areas, but wax resist is also a very, very important step in the historic chintz, where you want very fine white details, which is to me a very quintessential property of chintz. For that, that's a very first challenge I took on, and I said, if I can't figure out how to do this, I'm not going to go ahead. And I went to Indonesia first, and we were talking about what did I do. While I went west to study the historic textiles, I went east to Indonesia to figure out how do they do it. And I went to Indonesia because wax resist technique, where painting wax with in fine lines, is still very much practiced, and we know it as batik. So I spent some time in Indonesia traveling, going to government centers, looking museums, production centers, to see what was made. What was interesting was, and I guess that was the same in India too, or even historically and even now, nobody tells you exactly what goes into anything. It's usually a family held, a secret or formula that gives them that one up. So it was interesting, very, very interesting for me also to see that what was being done in Indonesia is not the same quality as was done historically there as well. It had become not as fine as before. But it gave me an impetus, and it gave me, gave me motivation to come back and experiment with wax. And eventually I was able to make enough headway that gave me, I said, okay, at least I have a starting point. It's not that it's not going to happen at all. So
Honestly, your passion, you pursuing your passion right now is just making me feel all the Netflix vibes, right? I can your story is like a Netflix limited edition series that I can watch at the moment, like a documentary. Honestly,
the weird thing is, I'm only attached to these textiles as I'm making it.
Oh wow.
I'm not really attached to them. I mean, people ask me very often, how do you feel that this one's sold and you won't see it again, or you see it later? It's. I have contemplated that question quite a bit, and weirdly, I'm not. I'm only attached to it as long as I'm making it.
Oh wow.
so you love the techniques.
Yeah, I think for me, it's the history that is a big glue that's holding it all together for me. It's how somebody figured out how to just imagine somebody figured out that putting it in dung and putting it in sunlight can bleach a cloth. Who in the world thought of that? For me, that's what drives it. I wish I could travel back in time and see who was it. I love that people found solutions.
So you figured out The process, I mean, I think that would be a 27-hour episode by itself. uh, and then what? Now that you knew what you could make it, what did you plan on doing with it?
So when and I think this was maybe 3-4 years into experimenting, and I had small pieces and something that I was comfortable enough to show other people. And I actually went back to London and I made an appointment with Rosemary Krill.
The lady who made the V&A book, the lady who
Yes.
started it all.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I basically started meeting people to get their take on, how do you think? What do you think? Or I mean, these are academics who've been in this field for so many years,
So
and
you
I
were
and I
meeting
cared
your
about
people.
their
You were meeting
opinion.
your hero.
Sorry, I was meeting my hero. Yes, the one who got me started, and it's a really funny story because the day that I was to meet Rosemary, I had an accident that morning, and I broke my two teeth that morning,
Where did the front two teeth?
the front two teeth.
Oh, damn.
And of course everybody was like, don't be late, it's a really important meeting. I was like maybe half an hour late, and of course I
I
was
gotta
like,
fix my tooth.
I didn't have time to do anything. I literally, I had one tooth which was at 45-degree angle and one tooth that had come cleanly off my front two teeth. And since because you don't see me, I have very prominent teeth, so it's not it's not like I can even hide it. So yeah, it's a funny story. Rosemary was waiting out in the, I think she came out and she probably went inside because she wasn't there. And I had, she was called out, and I was covering my mouth with my hands, and I said, I'm so sorry, but I was in an accident, and I, gave her a peek of my mouth, and she was like, oh, you poor thing, you want to have a cup of tea, but she very kindly did have that meeting with me, and
Did she encourage you to become an artist?
um, she did let me know that she had not seen anything like it in the past. She did let me know that it certainly was a place that I should continue. But yeah, you asked me what did I do. So I basically went and met curators. I went back to people who knew what I was doing. I even met people who have written books on it, and it was not always great. I met somebody, and without taking their name, out of respect, say that I was actually told you should go back to design school.
Oh, wow.
And that was a meeting I asked for. So, it wasn't unsolicited advice. And I remember driving back from that meeting, like completely, I was just on autopilot driving because I was like, what the hell just happened there? And that was not a great feeling. But I think I take criticism well. So it didn't stop me from,
So you started making more and more pieces. You started exhibiting them?
So, no, I did not exhibit until 2017. So I had been working on this for 7 years before I actually publicly showed to anyone. And again, that whole story came out. That whole thing happened really just coincidences, and like if you believe in things are meant to happen kind of thing. But I will say that I really put myself out there. Let me put it that way. I did not say, okay, I'm doing this and I don't have to show it to anybody. I really put myself out there in terms of meeting people. Whatever it was, good, bad, I put myself out there and, traveling, going and meeting people, letting people know. So one of the things that came out of meeting Rosemary and keeping in touch with her was that V&A was having a Fabric of India exhibition. And they wanted to have a guest blog. And they asked me to write a guest blog on my journey about Chintz, and I did.
The Victoria and Albert Museum.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
And it was fun writing it. I hadn't written anything actually until then about my work, and it was a fun article to write. And it just so happened that a gallery in Delhi, the director of Gallery Art Motive, Mala Neja, saw that article and reached out to me and said, "Hey, do you want to do an exhibition?" I was like, "What? Wait, I
Gallery motif, the gallery motif.
yes,
Wow, the famous gallery motif.
yes."
Wow.
And of course, I had not thought about. I want to clarify here that I had not thought about making a living with Chintz. At this point, I was actually doing other projects as well, which
Paid the bills.
yes, and this was something that I did for myself. So I had not really thought about making a living out of it. So when Mala wrote to me and said, "Do you want to do a show?" and I had not considered at all.
Did you even see yourself as an artist until then?
No, I still don't. I guess I see myself as Lara Croft, as Sagarika put it, and I love that. Yeah, so the very first time I exhibited was an art motive in 2017.
Wow. And resounding success.
It, without being as humbly as I can possibly say, it was sold out show.
I know, fantastic. So, the internet is a very weird, strange place, and everything is archived. So, I found this one quote about you. The pieces Renuka is baking today are stunning in their workmanship and beauty. I'm delighted to have been a witness to her progress and to have seen at first hand the incredible dedication with which she researches and experiments, continually searching for the perfect combination of cloth, milk, mordants, dyes, and resins that will equal those of her historic predecessors in this mysterious art. Rosemary Krill.
Yes, that was quite a circle for me coming back, and it's wonderful to hear that.
So clearly you did something right.
I guess I did.
I love the pause. You're like, did I? Did I?
Well, but you know what? I mean, of course they're well intended, but I still don't myself. I still don't think. Okay, so here's a question that got me started was like when I saw that book, and then when I found that it was not made that way today. So the question that was always for me was: is it possible to make 18th century quality chintz today? For me, it's like those people obsessed with puzzles or jigsaws or whatever. For me, it was that I had to answer that question: is it possible? So I will say that I personally don't think I have reached the quality entirely as it was done in 18th century. Just because from technical point of view, I don't have all the answers yet, and that's what still drives me. I think for me, it's always the exploration that drives me.
Absolutely, and that's what made you make the leap.
Well, obviously, when you did read the book by Rosemary Krill, and you took the leap after that, said, okay, this is what I'm going to do. There were chances of this not working out. Did you ever think about that?
Definitely, yes. For example, when an experiment failed spectacularly. So actually, Rosemary did come to the studio once with maybe about 15 on a tour with 15 different people, and I had made a small piece with wax to kind of experiment in front of them. And I put it in the indigo bath and took it out and then removed the wax. And it's a disaster, absolute disaster. In front of an audience. Yes, not a good place to be. But so my partner is a scientist in biosciences, and at that time he was working as a postdoc in Germany and then in Dundee in Scotland. And something that I really picked up from him is he always said, no experiment is a failure. Even something that doesn't work is telling you something. And I think I really internalized that, just to know that, not to see it as a failure, but that, hey, okay, I know now this doesn't work. So then let's move on to what works. So yes, while I did doubt, am I going to, succeed in this or not? That was never my focus. Success was, as ridiculous as it sounds, it was not my focus. My question was just, I guess the journey was more important to me.
Right. Transitioning from engineering to art, did you have instances where these two worlds collided? Like you could understand better about textiles. So, did you understand the machinery better? Did you understand the way the techniques work better when it comes to the art? And how did you put it into work together? Like, how did you make it work together?
That's a really great question, and I'll say that absolutely, I know today that if I didn't have the handloom experience in India and the technical textile expertise in the US, I could not have been where I am today. It's having, working with the hand experience in India, but also understanding the scientific side, the technical side of textiles, the chemistry. Why are things the way they are? And especially if you write a thesis, it changes you forever. You do a statistical course, it changes you forever. It really does. The rigor that you learn, that you go through writing a thesis, at least for me, master's thesis it gives you, and then of course working in a technical field in the automotive industry, it's the rigor was really important, along with the creative side and working with your hand side. And one of the things that I love about Chintz is, again, that the day that I realized that this is a perfect blend for me to use both my experiences. I don't think I could have done it without these two. And this is also something that I realized, and maybe something to be talked about later, is that it's been my life lesson, especially with respect to Chintz, is that no experience is wasted. It always comes back to teach you something later on.
How does a woman who is a high achiever take a leap in the society? Because it's obviously going to be a little scary, considering the fact that, there's a lot of other emotional, physical, that comes into picture when a woman is taking a leap. And obviously judgments, etc., etc. So how does that work for you? Like, how did it work for you? Was it not scary?
That's an interesting question. I think it works both ways for women, in the sense that, and this is just a societal conditioning, or just how it is, that I certainly feel women do not face the same pressure as men do in terms of taking care of the family. So we have that leeway, But on the other hand, is your work taken seriously? That is the other side of the coin. I personally did not really experience, just because I didn't have kids, and that, which is a big chunk that takes resources out of you. I don't think I was lucky in that, and if there was, you know what, I don't think I perceived it, because my mantra is, not really caring about what others do or say.
That's an interesting thought, actually. That's a very interesting and empowering thought, to be very honest. You did go from continents to industries. Each leap requires a sacrifice. Did you make any?
I think just letting go of anything familiar to you. For example, when I moved from the US back to India, I had absolutely no clue. I'm letting go of a very comfortable, very familiar life into something completely unknown. That certainly is a sacrifice.
So venturing into this particular niche must have its uncertainties, right? So how do you rationalize these uncertainties? How do you handle it?
Let's see. I think one of the things that I had prepared myself for is that there were no quick answers. The only thing that was predictable is the unpredictability of this whole thing. And I was prepared for it from the get-go. I think that helped me, stay the course. And the other thing that I feel, when I look back especially, you don't always realize this thing as you go through them, is I stayed flexible. I said, I'm not going to do only, if some things didn't work out, I was always staying, try to stay flexible to move on to the next thing. I think that really helped me.
Does a bit of blind faith help?
Oh, absolutely.
Really?
I think so. It blind faith, but not attachment.
Ah.
The minute you're attached that this will mean to me only if you have a certain result, then you're driven by, or there's a underlays of fear and all other horrible things creep in. I think it was really important to just have blind faith, but not to attach to it.
Are you optimistic as a person by nature?
Strange, because my partner says I'm very pessimistic. But I think I'm pessimistic when it comes to maybe other spheres in my life. But I'm quite optimistic with work.
And that optimism really drives you through?
Yes, definitely.
Fantastic. So do you even think of, before you start anything, do you think what would be the cost of failure? Or does it even enter your mind?
It does enter my mind. I think it's only natural that it would enter. But maybe it's also the confidence that I have that whatever comes out of it, I'll be able to handle it.
So you take it as a lesson.
Yeah.
And, just experiment better and improvise better the next time.
There's no better, just more. It need not be better. I don't know.
That's actually a very nice way of looking at things. Did you face any particular obstacles that you remember? Like maybe one single thing that just took you time, effort to solve in this particular process of you starting your own stuff?
I think availability of materials was very difficult for me, which even today is, for example, buffalo milk.
That's hard to get.
It is really hard to get. So if you go to Hyderabad or if you go to other places, you actually see buffaloes walking in the middle of the street in the city. It seems to be regional. I've seen buffaloes in Rajasthan, I've seen, Hyderabad. But you will see more cows, at least where I live, which is northeastern part of Bangalore. So every now and then I see a buffalo and I'm like, oh my God, buffalo. So, I have actually followed one home or its home or, figured out who owns it to see, because without buffalo milk, I cannot even start my work. It's a huge challenge. So, and of course, this will sound crazy, but sunny days are really good for my work.
Do you have a buffalo milk guy?
I do, but it keeps changing because, I get milk when they are pregnant. So it's not always a buffalo is.
So how many buffalo milk guys do you have in your phone book?
At least 5 to 6.
Oh, wow.
So something that we all know is that the grass is not always green on the other side. Did something not work out in this process for you in the beginning or maybe even in between?
I did fail spectacularly in indigo for a very long time. But eventually, I wouldn't say I've figured it out all yet. It is still on a lot of many to-do things on it. But it needs time and effort, which, to be honest, I have not given it. But I think what you raise is a good point, because when something doesn't work out, you have to be able to give it thought and again, learn from it or do something different. Sometimes you don't have the time to do it because you're caught up with other things. Yeah, I mean, there are many number of those things on my list that I need to go back and revisit.
So, ever-changing trends about art these days and kalamkari itself. And how do you see yourself blending tradition with modern tastes?
I don't. The one thing that I've always been very clear about, when I started doing Chintz is I do it for me. I'm not doing it for anyone. Even the commissions that come through. I think after 2017, I worked for 5 years non-stop with commissions. from collectors and museums. Yes, I am doing a piece for them, but I'm really doing it for me. Because every time I do something, I learn something from it.
No creative briefs.
In those years, no, yeah, there was no, and and maybe that's why I'm here where I am today, taking a slight pause from it, because I do feel a bit burnt out from the very intense 5 years, and need to get the creativity flowing again.
Absolutely.
So, I think this question is something that I really waited to ask you. What do you think would have happened if, let's say, Renu didn't take the leap? Who would you be now?
Oh boy. I think I would be dabbling with something. I don't think, something that would still be like a challenge. Like Siddharth just called me before the show. I'm a fixer. I like problems. I think I would have found a different problem that I wanted to address.
So, what does it take to be an entrepreneur, an artist?
What does it take? I think a clarity does help. Clarity of what you're doing, why you're doing. I think it's very foundational step for the future for an entrepreneur.
All of this sounds very interesting, very nice to hear, but obviously this was not easy, right? Taking the leap was not easy.
So what was the biggest challenge?
Working alone is a challenge. In my case, it was just me trying to figure out stuff. I did not employ a team. I mean, of course, not the case with every entrepreneur, but in this case, I chose to work alone. Sometimes working alone is, it's great, but it's also limiting. The other ones I would say is, I guess not taking the leap was just, again, not, sometimes you don't have the clarity. You know what you want to do, but you don't know how to get there always. So that part does, can take the joy out of it sometimes, which is why maybe I just learned over the years to not stay focused on the outcome as such, but to actually enjoy doing what I'm, and come on, nobody can complain in my place. Hey, I'm going to museums, I'm going to Indonesia, and I was doing all these things, so I can't really complain that I didn't enjoy all that.
So clearly, it all started with motivation. I mean, you read this book, it changed your life. Angels were singing in the background. But then, yeah, it gets dreary, right? Day in, day out, you're making a piece. You're waiting 10 days for the buffalo milk to dry. And then God only knows what else comes up after that. It's a time-taking process. Like you mentioned, it was, what, a 7-year journey, a 10-year journey?
Mm-hmm.
Is it more discipline, less motivation? Or is it more motivation, less discipline? What was it in your case?
Through those 10 years, you mean? I think you absolutely need motivation and discipline.
Okay.
I don't think, at least I could not have lasted or made any progress. So, for example, usually when I do the dung part, it's at night.
Mm-hmm.
And outside, when there are a ton of mosquitoes, trust me, it is absolutely motivation and discipline that is making me be outside and handling dung while I'm being bitten by 1,000 mosquitoes, or for that matter, climb stairs and go up like 20 times a day to go water the cloth that is being exposed. It's both. The discipline and motivation is absolutely crucial for me to plow through
And
my journey.
do they fluctuate?
Absolutely. Yes. When something fails, then the motivation definitely takes a hit. But maybe it's a discipline that carries you through.
So how do you deal with a setback? What do you do when it just isn't your day?
Uh, and this is something that I did from my Delhi days when I had a partner is go catch the matinee.
Oh, Bollywood?
No. Or at least get out, not be in the same place. Well, those days it was matinee, but now maybe it's just Netflix without having
Actually,
to.
those days matinee were mostly the English shows, right?
Yes.
Yeah. What were your favorite movies?
For me, lunch and matinee is like even today it feels like the best. Just forget everything else. All that is going wrong. Just get out, grab some good food and a drink, and watch something.
So it's your ritual to reset.
Yes.
Yeah. Does it happen a lot? Do these rituals happen a lot?
Yeah, they do. And maybe they happen a lot also because there's that stuff that you can stream. It was more difficult those days to like get out and go buy tickets and go see something. Today it's you just have to switch on the iPad, unfortunately.
But it's also a factor, it's also a function of the amount of failure that is part of the process, inherent to the process.
Yes. And I would go on to say that because I'm kind of taking a break with Chintz, but then I am doing other stuff that also has definitely has failures. So in general, I would say that excuse my language, but shit is going to happen. There is no way to avoid it. You just have to move on.
So, NVIDIA founder Jensen Huang, I mean, he's made this company into what? I think it's the latest $2 trillion company. So I think there are too many $1 trillion companies these days, and that's not necessarily a good thing. He said, and I quote, "I wouldn't build NVIDIA if I had to do it all over again. It's just too damn hard." Quote, unquote. Is that true? Do you feel the same way?
I think I do. I'm going to be 50 this year. Every cloth is washed 300 times from start to finish.
300.
300 times.
Oh, wow.
And I do most of it. I do not think I have the physical energy, at least to do as many pieces as I did before. It is definitely time to get help, which I have very stubbornly refused to. Yeah. It's weird. There is a time and place. And maybe this was a sweet spot for me because, I'd worked with handlooms, I'd worked with technical textiles. I had this time to do it and the physical energy to do it. And in a space where I didn't have a lot of responsibilities. This was the sweet spot for it.
Yeah, it couldn't have been any other time of your life.
Probably not.
Right. You keep mentioning about how your life at a technical textile company contributed, and I'm sure. I mean, you're not living in a bubble. You use Netflix. You see tech all around you. You're in Bangalore. You can't run away from tech, and you hear about all these tech startups and the way they do business and all of that. And a lot of it is just very different. So, is there anything from the so-called tech way of doing business, or the corporate way of doing business, do you think that applies to artistry work like yours?
I think so, yes. One of the things I would say right away is, so what do tech startups do? They basically give new technology products or services, or they take the old stuff and deliver it in a new way, right? I think it would apply to, even someone like me, is that at some point I have to, like say, that you just started, noted in the focus on the last question that there is only a time that I can do this. But it doesn't mean I have to stop my connection with Chintz as in the way it is now. It's, borrowing from like tech startups. I can and I should be able to take Chintz and deliver it in a new way. It doesn't have to be the way I have been doing it. I just have to be open to doing it. And certainly there's an opportunity there as well.
Fabulous. What a great answer. That's incredible. There's so much to unpack that. I think you can do an entire episode on just that one sentence.
I'm also thinking. I'm gonna like probably be able to do around 4 episodes of just you talking about chins and the whole process behind
You
it,
really
honestly.
should do an entire series on just chins. I think more people need to know about chins.
I think you should be on Netflix.
If you say so.
So, I mean, clearly, yeah, I mean, you've been through a lot in terms of going through. I mean, like, we just unpacked, uh, just discovering the techniques itself was 7 PhDs worth of work. And PhDs are all about experimentation and research. So, for every one successful experiment that you ran, there must have been at least 10 failures. So, this failure after failure after failure after failure, all this has to take a toll at some point. Everybody's human. So, and one thing that a lot of people don't talk about, entrepreneurship, that what we believe, Sagarika and I believe, are very important, is the mental health aspect of entrepreneurship. It is a mental game, and a lot of it needs to be unpacked. And I think while a lot of gyan goes from one entrepreneur to another about the secret sauce to success, which probably doesn't really exist anyway. Stuff that they really need to know before they jump, before they take the leap, about what are the right mental health practices. That knowledge transfer doesn't really happen.
So, how have you been taking care of yourself throughout this? I'm going to call it a tedious process because it is. It is very mentally taxing. So, how do you take care of yourself?
I think what has really helped me is to talk about it. Having a extended support system is really, really important. A support system who can advise, is not judgmental. Even if they don't have the answers, to just hear you. So it's just thinking out aloud. You just need a shoulder sometimes to just, especially if it's you're a small team. Or for me, it has been talking to my partner. Has been really, really. In fact, I came up with a lot of solutions just doing that. To just have somebody who's listening to me and with a little nudge, it really helped me not be too demotivated when the going was tough. And sometimes small wins is really, really important. For me, the big win was, actually having a show, even though that's not what I had actually planned for, but it is. It was a very momentous time in my career to have a show at Art Motive. But
The gallery. Let's not forget. I mean, the roster is incredible. When I look at
yes,
the roster, it is the who's who of Indian artists. And then along that list of who's who is Renuka Reddy.
I did get very, very lucky because I absolutely love working with Mala Neja at the Art Motive.
But so, speaking of which, I think that something I would like for you to share your point of view is about your self perception. After you moved from an engineer to an artist to a cultural conservator or well, like an art conservator, how did you perceive yourself after that? What was your perception of yourself?
Tough one, huh?
That's a tough one. One of the things I very consciously made a decision is not stick to labels. Labels make me very uncomfortable, which is weird because I'm the sort of a person, you have those coloring books where they're pre-drawn things and you have to paint in them. I'm the sort of person who will do the reds only where the reds have to go and the greens only where the green have to go. But yet, I hate labels that define you to be someone, to be something. So to answer your question, I just am. I don't want to, see myself as an artist or a historian, or I feel they constrict. In my
Yeah.
head, they constrict. I'm not talking about others. In my head, they constrict what I should be doing, what I should be thinking. And I want to get as many things. I don't want these labels to constrict me.
Did the label entrepreneur ever enter your mind?
No, I was surprised when you reached out to me and you said that, hey, this is also entrepreneurship. I mean, I do understand the traditional sense of entrepreneur, obviously, but this I didn't, because for me it was, it's like it's more a, hey, an idea, a journey, but hey, yeah, you put it together. Of course it is.
It's entrepreneur.
Yeah, that was interesting.
How do you deal with skepticism from people around you when they said, hey, I'm doing this now? And some of them might not even know it, right? They wouldn't know what Chintz is, and they wouldn't know where you're going or headed to. So how did you deal with skepticism?
I wish I had a better answer for you on this, Sagarika, but I think if you ask my friends and family, they never know what I'm going to do. I think my behavior all my life has been, unpredictable, in the sense that I dance to my own tune. I always have. I don't think they're surprised at all that I'm doing this.
You dance to your own tune. That's an incredible answer, to be very honest. But so I mean, being strong and bold can take a huge toll on women because they are usually looked upon as nurturing, caring, affectionate. But when you are dealing with teams, or you're dealing with your artisans, or your whoever you're collaborating with, right? They don't take you seriously, like you mentioned before. How did you step up, or how did you get into the field and say, you know what, I'm doing this. You're going to do this with me.
Yeah, that is hard. It's on those levels, and sometimes it's not always apparent that it's because of this that you're not getting a result, or that's a tough one. But I will say that, and this might be a cliche, but Indian men especially might be more responsive to a motherly type of whatever. And thankfully, I am getting older, so I think that actually favors me in the sense of getting a response from.
So does tenacity help?
Yeah, it does. You sometimes have to be a dog with a bone. I wish I had, great answers to these questions, but for me personally, it has been just, as you said, it's been interesting since you invited me to talk on the show. It's been a while since I've thought of my own journey, and it's always weird how you get different insights just because you're looking back, right? So for me, it has been definitely tenacity has helped. Staying flexible has helped a lot. Blind faith has helped. But at the same time, even when I decided to do Chintz, I had my eye on the market, in the sense that I knew this was a textile that was very significantly important to historic Indian textiles. And I also knew nobody was doing it. And I had a hunch, and it was not the reason why I started doing it. But I had a hunch, a very strong hunch, that people would be interested in it, because there is a gap in the market for this, or it hasn't been revived before.
So you had no anxiety in terms of whether what you're doing is worth it. So the only anxiety that would come is from the process.
Yes.
How did you deal with anxiety?
I think I just went back. I think I basically took on a mindset where I, first of all, wallow in self-pity, then move on to, doing things that made me feel good, whether it's stuffing my face or binge watching. And then the third day, okay, what have I learned from it?
Right.
And the fourth day, okay, what am I going to do different?
So this was your matinee rituals anxiety.
I think stepping away from anxiety is really important to get a handle on it. I could not shrug it off, the anxiety part of it. I had to face it, but be gentle. I also realized, only a recent realization to me, that I'm not very hard on myself. I'm really not. When I talk to other people, friends and family who are either going through a hard time career-wise, or it was a bit of an epiphany for me to realize that I'm not very hard on myself, and that has actually really helped me to be gentle with myself.
Wow.
So, how do you juggle personal and professional life, or how do you juggle both of these worlds?
I think it's not been so difficult for me because I don't work with a big team. If I did, I imagine things would be very different. Because I work alone, or at the most sometimes employ part-time helpers, I have the luxury of taking my own call. And I do think being an entrepreneur, which is, when you don't have a boss, hey, you want to take a day off, you should be able to take a day off. Why are you doing it otherwise? I mean, one should enjoy the perks of, being an entrepreneur, and I make full use of it.
If you do have a stress management system, or let's say some advice to the audience about how you handle stressful days, what would it be?
I would say step away from that. Firstly, feel it. Feel the failure, feel the stress, feel it. It's important to give space for it. And then just step back a little bit and then revisit. Most of the times, it is not as bad as it is. Or you get a different idea or a different thought. Just getting a different perspective alone is hugely empowering to be able to manage that stress. At least that's worked for me.
Ooh, this actually sparked a new question in my mind. Have you ever mentored anybody into teaching them this technique, this process?
That's another great question, Sagrika, which I do get asked a lot. That is definitely in the future. It's something that I want to do in the near future, is to, pass on what I have learned in how to make chintz. But at the moment, I have not. One, because I feel like I haven't. There's more for me to discover and learn, and just get my hands dirty a little bit more. But the idea is to either write a book or start some kind of training program on how to make historic chintz.
You just said pass down what you've learned and what you've done. How does it actually feel to say that? Because you're passing down generations of historical, richness from India. So, how do you feel about it?
I don't know. I didn't look at it that way. Though maybe I'm too close to it, and for me,
You've made it.
Maybe.
Well,
Any parting advice for our listeners?
Have fun. It's really important to have fun. And I know it sounds cliche, enjoy the journey, but there is some amount of wisdom in it. Is, work hard, but have fun along the way, and don't be too attached to it. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. That's all right. Something else will work.
Thank you so much. We've had our minds blown today.
Thank you for having me.
honestly, my mind is blown. But thank you, Renuka, for joining us.
Thank you.